Okay, there we go. So at the end of this session, if you signed up for it through our landing page, or if you sign up for the recording afterward, you will get a thank you email. And in those thank you emails, I make sure to include any of the links I have on my additional information slides or the more resources slides. So don't panic if you're like, oh, what's the URL to that? It's in an email that'll come to you once the recording is made available. And then just so you know, we've changed the way we handle our recordings for our webinars. So they are going to be in Zoom for 30 days. And then after that, you can find them on the Nimble Pros YouTube channel. So, but if you want those thank you emails with the links, you still have to sign up to the page to get those. Those will not be on the YouTube channel. All right. So today we're going to talk about architecture decision records. However, I just want to make sure that we're clear that this isn't just architecture that this applies to. You could have these apply to other parts of business decisions as well. So like maybe you have product decisions, things like that. The documentation part doesn't have to be architecture specific, but there are some things that I want to focus on from an architectural standpoint. When I say architecture, I'm not talking building, I'm talking software architecture. So let's go. So when it comes to making decisions architecturally, I want to make sure we understand a couple of the things ahead of time before we get straight into documenting. Uh, First, we got to understand that process of how do you make an architectural decision? The things that we run into as architects, we need to make sure we have enough information that is relevant for us to make the decision and enough information that is good for us to use to make an informed decision. But we don't want to wait to the point where we have way too much information and now we're overwhelmed with information and can't make a decision. So what is enough relevant information is going to depend on your situation that you're in and what you really need for that part to like to make the decision itself. So maybe for some decisions you need to know who all's involved, all the different alternatives, like an exhaustive list versus some you might be like, oh, you know what? I know right away my decision is this. I don't need the full exhaustive list of, oh, these are the other options. So it's always it depends as to what determines is enough relevant information, but you have to have enough to make an informed decision. You don't want to make an architectural decision just as a snap judgment. That's never a good idea. Now, once you gather the information and can make that decision, the next thing you need to be able to do is justify that decision. And when you justify the decision, I can't stress this enough, it's both from the technical standpoint and from the business standpoint. Our architectural decisions that we make today are not just going to be technical typically. There's probably some kind of business aspect in there that gets factored in. When the business is considered as part of the decision-making process, remember to justify it with both the business reasoning and the technical. The technical reasoning will not make sense necessarily for business users because the business users may be non-technical. So the technical description over their head, way too much information, way too much out of their league. So make sure you keep the business stuff using, now as we use it, Nimble Pros, a lot of domain-driven development terms. Use your ubiquitous language, use the terms that are used in their domain. Use terms that everybody in the business uses as part of your justification so that everybody understands the context of it. Well, my favorite step of all this is number 3, documenting that decision. Why is that my favorite? You'll see in the rest of this presentation. I like documentation because it captures a lot of context. It also saves me in the future because the context I have today, I may remember it tomorrow. I might remember it 3 months from now. But once we get out to like a year from now, will I remember the context I had today? Probably not. I'm lucky I remember what I did 5 minutes ago, let a year from now. So these decision records capture our context as to why did we make that decision today? What information did we have available? The other thing to keep in mind when you're documenting decisions like this is that you're going into a decision with what you know today. You can't always anticipate what's coming in the future. So you have to make a decision with what you know, not with with what might be coming or what you hope might be coming. Never bank your architectural decisions on your hopes. You want to bank your architectural decision on the facts, what's available. One of those, I kind of hope that the technology is going to go this route. Not enough. All right, so we talk about gathering the relevant information, and we talk about creating a justification, both business and technical. We want to document all of that. Then the last part, make sure that we communicate the decision to the stakeholders, to the people who are impacted. Each decision will have a different set of stakeholders because each decision has all sorts of conditions around it. So just be aware that you need to find the way to communicate to your stakeholders in a way that makes sense. Now I'm going to show some anti-patterns, and one of the anti-patterns has to deal with communication. And so I'll give you some tips on how you can better communicate these decisions to the stakeholders. So we need to cover a few of the architectural decision anti-patterns just so you can be aware of these are some pitfalls or some gotchas you may run into when you make architecture decisions. These will also help set up for when we talk about the architecture decision records here in a little bit. So the ones that I'm showing here, they come from the book called The Fundamentals of Software Architecture, Mark Richards and Neil Ford. I love that book. It's so easy to read and to page through, and the stories that they tell are easy to relate. But this is what we talk about when we talk about architectural decision issues, are anti-patterns. So the first one, where we try to make an architectural decision, sometimes we want to push it off because we have that worry of, what if I'm wrong? That holding back the decision because the what if I'm wrong is an anti-pattern. You don't want to be caught up in the what if I'm wrong. So what I think about it from an architectural standpoint going into a decision is, what decision can I make today with the information I know today? I know that this might be a decision that's wrong in the future, but I can't predict the future. I can only predict what I know with the technology that I have today, with the business state today. I might be able to get a better idea of the technology support in terms of technical decisions. Like, okay, I can use this particular database platform because I know it's going to scale well for what I need. You can have the abilities and like the scalability, availability, reliability. You can have those all going through your head and consider those, but you can only consider for so much. After that, you can't see that far into the future. So you only are going to consider what you know and how far that extends. Don't panic when you're like, oh, I don't know what I don't know, because that is something. There are things out there that you don't even know exist, let alone you don't know them. So the you don't know, that's okay. When you make your architectural decisions, don't panic about the what if I'm wrong. Remember that there are trade-offs. And remember that if you don't have enough information, if you need to change your decision, so be it. That means, for example, if you're dealing on a project where you make a database platform decision, and then as you're developing your application, you realize, oh, there were things I forgot to consider. Okay, so now you need to change an architectural decision. Is it purely technical? Maybe. Will it impact your architecture? Those are in a few slides, so we'll check and we'll see. When does an architectural decision need to be captured? What is an architectural part? But know that don't let those things hold you back. But the what if I'm wrong? You're making decisions based on what you know today and what you know that could carry you into the future for a certain point. None of us have crystal balls. None of us can really predict, one, where the business is going and the business needs, or two, the technology and where it's going. Even if we're privileged enough to work with the people who create the technology, who have the knowledge to tell us where it's going, it only gets you so far. All right, the next anti-pattern to know about is Groundhog Day. So Groundhog Day is named based off of a movie here called Groundhog Day, where the guy gets stuck in a time loop. And so he's stuck replaying the day over and over. For software architecture anti-patterns, this is a problem because there's usually a decision was made, but it's missing the context. So why was this decision made? Where's the technical justification? Where's the business justification? The justifications are commonly left off from ADRs. Um, and I don't know why they don't include them sometimes, because that why is important. That is a question that we start asking when we're what, maybe 1.5, 2 years old. Our question to our parents are why? Why this? Why that? Why do I have to go to bed early? Why do I have to wake up at a certain time? Why do we have to go places? Why? Why is a question that we ask early in our life and we continue to ask often. So you want to capture the whys in the architecture decisions. That's critical. Otherwise, you run into these Groundhog Day conversations of why did they make this decision? Why are we running this with SQLite? Why are we running this with another database platform? There's all sorts of questions of why. Capture the why. Now, again, stressing that it's not just the technical, but it's also the business as well. So let's talk about what gets left off with those. Typically, these ADRs are going to be written by architects, many who came up into the role as a developer. I come into this as a developer, and so I can tell you, the developer mind, I want to write code. I don't want to write documentation. It's more fun writing code, right? But the thing is, we have to write the documentation so we understand what's going on. From a technical standpoint, I could capture the technical easily, and my teammates would understand what I'm talking about because we have these conversations. We do this thing called we practice communication. It's not like oh, today I'm going to practice communication, check a checklist kind of thing. No, this is just something we call life, where you have to learn how to talk with people and you learn to refine your ways of talking with people based on your interactions with them. Technically, you learn to work really well with that. As developers and technical minded, that's where our strengths tend to be is technically. The problem that we overlook is the business part. And so this is one where we need to get better practice. This is where we talk about the DDD and ubiquitous language. This is where we talk about using the terms that the business uses, not the technical terms. When you use these terms in the justifications, you're going to lessen the amount of whys. When you use the business terms in the justifications, that means that you're going to have a view for not only your stakeholders, but if your stakeholders have other people that they answer to that they need to be able to explain what's going on, your business justifications will be worded in a way that they can then use that same wording to explain it to other people who they have to answer to. Now, those 4 common business justifications, let's talk about those. So there's 4 common justifications for businesses when you're talking through architectural decisions. The first one to think of is cost. Money is an easy thing to bring up as a justification point. I didn't choose this platform because the licensing was that expensive, then it wouldn't bring us a good return on investment. However, there's this other product that will meet our needs that is more affordable or that is more aligned with our budgets. So that kind of justification, that's common. The time to market. So how quickly can you go from concept to out and getting people in it? User satisfaction is another one. So why are you making this choice? Well, because this is going to make a better environment for our users. This is going to make it so that our users are not so cranky with us anymore because the system's getting fixed. And now they have a better user experience, which means they're going to tell their friends about our platform as well. And then there's strategic positioning. How do you compare to your competitors in the market? And are you in a good spot strategically? These are the business justifications. These are the things that need to be in ADRs to capture the business questions of why. Why did you make that decision? Why did you choose this small name platform instead of this big name platform? Or vice versa. Why did you choose this big name platform and not the small name platform? So there's that. The last anti-pattern I want to show is the email-driven architecture. This one makes me cringe a lot because how many of you use email for document storage? How many of you are the ones who are doing the search? Like, okay, I know I sent an email on this topic. Kind of remember the date. Let me search my inbox. Oh, look, there's the document I put. Oh, is that the latest version of that document though? Might not be. Hold up. Let me go and check my results again. You can see how this is getting really cumbersome really fast. Do not use your email as a source for your ADRs. Do not make that the source of truth. The other thing happens, so this won't apply to everybody, but this may apply to a subset where what if you change your name? And some places are good about changing names and emails and things move smoothly. Others do not. And so if I, for example, weren't married yet and were under my maiden name and stored some of my ADRs there, and then I got married and they treated it as separate inboxes because they couldn't figure out a way to do a simple rename. Okay, so now I have two inboxes. Which one are the ADRs in that are official? Which one are the ones that are not? Which ones have expired? Which ones have obsoleted? Now you see how it gets even worse. So do not use email as your repository for your ADRs. I see that and I'm just like, no. However, now this goes back to the whole communication thing and how do we get better at communicating our decisions? So things to note with that. You can tell people that you made a decision via email. But when you do, do not put the content or do not put the actual content of the decision itself or its justifications in the email. In the email, you can say something like, hey, we've made an update to a decision. Here's the nature and the context of the decision. To see the actual decision and everything else, here's the link to the system of record where our ADRs are stored. Here's that very specific link to that ADR. The reason why you do that is because if you include your decision, your justification in the email body, first of all, people are going to be relying on those emails rather than on your documentation itself because they're going to see the email as the source of documentation. And then second of all, when you go to update those documents, they'll still be referring back to their emails rather than the source of truth. So you want to get in the habit of, hey, we made a change. Here is the ADR link. The other gotcha we got to pay attention to is who are we notifying when these change? We want to make sure we only identify the stakeholders and notify the stakeholders. Because typically your ADRs, your architectural decision records, are going to be documents that are needed by a select group of people. So it could be something like maybe your technical team, maybe it's a purely technical architectural thing. Okay. Or it could be maybe you have project managers who need access to these ADRs. Or you could have C-levels. You could have all sorts of people who are stakeholders in these things. But you want to make sure that when you do this, that you're only including those who are impacted by it. You don't want to include it for the whole, you don't want to send these company wide like, hey, we made a change, we made a decision, and then let the whole company know. That guy who's working in the mail room who doesn't even use your application doesn't care. Don't do that. But when you send the email, when you do the communication, make sure you say, please see this decision using the following link, and then link to your ADR. Now, I will talk about where to store those ADRs here in a little bit. We'll talk about when do you create them. We'll talk about the document life of them. We'll talk about what goes in them. But any questions so far about the anti-patterns or anything we've covered so far? No? Go ahead, James.
Yeah, no questions.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's talk about what decisions are considered architecturally significant that should be considered in architectural decision records. So when it comes to architecturally significant, that's a term that was coined by a gentleman named Michael Nygaard. Michael Nygaard is a well-known name in the software architect world. He helps with creating like ADRs and ADR templates. We'll see his ADR template here toward the end. Probably one of my favorites because it's nice and simple. When it comes to documentation, simplicity is a beautiful thing, but don't oversimplify. But he's got 5 different things, 5 different criteria to help you determine, is something architecturally significant to be in an architectural decision record? If it's not fitting the architectural, it could be technical, in which case document that decision anyhow, because again, what you know today, you may not have that same context a year from now. Technical decisions will follow the same formatting, uh, product decisions, just decisions in general, but from an architectural standpoint. So the first thing we want to see is it structure related? So decisions that impact the patterns or styles of architecture used. So if you're making a decision, for example, on how to break up your modules in a modular monolith, or how you handle bounded contexts in microservices, those are considered structural. Those are definitely architectural. Document them. ADRs, please. The next one are what I'm going to call ilities. And the reason why I'm calling them ilities, even though not all of them are technically ilities, is because you're going to hear that some people will call them non-functional characteristics, but that non-functional term turns people off of it. Some people will call them like quality characteristics, but ilities is the easy one. So this is when you're thinking of things like availability or reliability or performance, which isn't ending in ility, but is still considered one of these characteristics. There's a huge list of them when you look at structural
Security.
stuff. Security is another one. Good call out there, Spitali. So yeah, security is another one that doesn't end in ility, but is very important. And actually next month I'm doing a webinar on architectural katas. And so we will focus more on the ilities there as well. And security is probably going to be the one that comes up a lot, depending on your mindset. But yeah, when I first heard about ADRs and when I first heard about the architectural katas, security was the first ility that came to mind for us too. The next one on determining if something, so if anything in your decision is going to impact one of the ilities, consider it architectural for documentation purposes. Dependencies is the next one. And this is how do the various parts of your application couple? So if the parts of your application are coupled in a certain way, document it. Why is it that way? Because you might be coupling things intentionally, but your context versus somebody who's maybe new to the project, those contexts aren't the same. So you need to set that context. You need to explain, why did you couple these together? The next one is interfaces. So how are your services and components accessed by others? If that is a thing to consider, that's probably going to be an architectural decision. And then the last of what determines is something is an architecturally significant thing to be classified under architectural decision records is construction. So if it's related to the platforms, the frameworks, the tools, or the processes, it's probably architecturally significant. That said, if it's purely technical, don't let the term architectural decision records steer you clear. Think of it then as just, it's a technical decision record. You're still making a decision. We still need to capture the why. Hi, Peter. All right. So what are decision records? What do these look like? So I'm going to show you the template that Fundamentals of Software Architecture includes. I'm going to show other ones as well. But I'm also going to add comments along the way of, hey, by the way, this works and here's why, or this may be only optional and here's why. So the first thing we look at in a decision record, so this is, again, the ADR format I'm using is, for this demo is the Fundamentals of Software Architecture. So you're going to have a title. When you have your title, it's an identifier and a short description. So that identifier could be a number. It might be a number with a version attached to it. Don't make it a GUID. This is one of those few times where an identifier is a GUID. This is documentation that's going to be facing people. Avoid the GUID if you can. Make it so that it's a friendly identifier that people can read. I've worked in document control before where we've had to have different categories in addition to titles. And so sometimes that title is a little more than just the title itself. It's a very distinct identifier of this particular decision. The next thing you're going to see is the status. Now, some people will have a draft status, some people go straight to proposed. The draft status is one of those where you're like, you know what? I have a decision. I think I'm good at all of this with all these different facts and stuff, but you know what? I'm going to run this by my fellow architects on my architect team and make sure that I didn't miss something. Or, I'm missing this one little piece of detail. Let me go talk to the stakeholder who can get me that information and then let me go back and update my ADR. But at least you started the documentation. A start is a huge thing. And then, of course, there are things like accepted, superseded, obsoleted. I forgot to include things like rejected. Rejected is a state as well. When it comes to context, so why do we have to make this decision in the first place? What's pushing us to have to make this decision? What's going on in our system? Which system or systems are giving us this grief? I was working in an e-commerce situation once where our website wasn't giving the right calculations at our checkout. And we noticed it looked like it was coming down to taxes. Well, we on the e-commerce thought we were just talking to our ERP system. There was something with the ERP system. Turned out the ERP system used a tax system. And so it was actually the tax system that was a little off. They rebooted the tax system, everything was back in business. It was awesome. But we didn't know the full context of our setup until we had a problem that could actually reveal that, hey, by the way, there's yet another system involved. So when we deal with, oh, well, we had a problem. So it wasn't an architectural decision for us that we documented. It was a problem of, hey, by the way, whenever you're dealing with architecture in general for this particular section, you need to understand that this is how it's built. So it wasn't that it was a decision for us, it was a capturing retrospectively of, oh, this is actually how the system is set up. Because we didn't have, the place had a bunch of turnover, so we didn't have architectural diagrams that really showed and captured what we were dealing with. So context, make sure you include which systems are involved. It could be your code. It could be your code or a third-party code. It could be a combination. The next section is going to be the decision itself. What is the decision that you made and why? And remember what the justification. It's not just the technical, but also the business as well, because you're probably dealing with business stakeholders and not just technical stakeholders. The next section that they use is consequences. And in the fundamentals of software architecture, they were talking about like, what is the impact? When I was looking at it too, the other thing that came to mind is what are the trade-offs? So what kind of things are going to happen because of this decision? And what are the trade-offs by choosing this decision? What do you lose and what do you gain? By choosing other options, what could you have gained? What are you not getting because of those? These don't have to be super in depth, but make it so that it's good for the people who need to review these. The next section that they put in the book is an optional section, and that's compliance. And we're not talking about things like PCI compliance or ITAR or FedRAMP. Not how are you working with compliance regulations. The compliance section of the ADR is specifically how do you get the people who are implementing your architecture to stay within the guidance of, okay, we've made this decision. Now you need to deal with this decision. You need to comply with this decision. Then the last section that they have, which is also optional, is notes. For this is where you have things like the metadata related to the ADR. So who wrote it? When was it written? Any other details that don't fit the other categories, things like that. I would suggest impacted stakeholders would probably go in there as well, since they don't really fit the other categories. But you do want to document who was there, who helped make the decision. Maybe you have business folks who have to sign off on decisions. So maybe you're like, okay, I'm going to make a platform decision and I'm going to choose this ERP system over another one. And then you have your CFO who has signed off on it from a financial standpoint. Maybe you have your plant managers or other people who are signing off for other standpoints, but you want to capture who all was involved in that decision. Because typically it's a team decision with more than one person. The other thing to capture too, I was talking with a friend and they're like, yeah, we made this decision. And then months later, one of their business folks are like, well, this is a stupid decision and I didn't okay it. They went back to the architectural decision record. That person very much did indeed okay it. In fact, they were the ones who approved and signed off on it. So having that, they were able to go back and say, well, listen, you might not sign off on it currently, but you did sign off on it in the first place. So capturing all of that is kind of important. Okay, so who are these decision records for? Well, they're definitely for your stakeholders, the people who are going to be impacted by these, the people who need to comply with them. They are for decision makers because today you're making a decision. You're going to make this architectural decision. You'll capture this document. You're going to end up storing it somewhere. Somebody else comes along, inherits your code, and they're like, okay, I got to make a decision. You know, what did they do in the first place? They can go back to these decision records and see, oh, this was the previous decision. This is why they made the decision. This was considered, and here's why. So they have some insight into that. But best of all or worst of all, depending on how you look at it, think of the decision record. If you're the one creating this, who are you really creating this for? Yes, the stakeholders. Yes, the decision makers. But selfishly, you're also creating this for future you. Again, the context that you have today, you may remember that tomorrow. You might remember it in 3 months, but a year from now, good luck with that. All bets are off at that point. And so it's one of those that document things for future you. If you're not sure what details you should or shouldn't include, think about the people who are going to be looking at them and think about how many times they're going to ask you why. Do you have all of their whys answered? Or most of their whys covered? Do you have most of their whys covered for future you to handle those whys? Those are the guidance I use when I'm doing my architectural decision records. So making sure that you've got that in your mind of, okay, why? Let me make sure I get that down. All right. So we've got the who are they for, but when are they used? Like, do people actually use these decision records? How many times as developers do we think, I don't want to create the documentation because nobody's going to go back and look at it? That's usually what I hear talking with friends. Are like, I don't create the documentation because nobody's going to look at it. Or future me might look at it and I'm just like, I can read my own code. But the thing is, it's not just going to be you using it. And so you kind of need to make sure that you document it in a way that can be used for the future. So where are these decision records used? How do people actually go and read them? Well, one of the things we use them for is for onboarding people into our projects. So you have somebody who's new to your code base, or new to your system, new to your company even. Architecture decision records will help that answer their whys as they're coming in and learning the system. Oh, at my last company, we used this particular messaging platform. And now I'm in this new company and they use a different messaging platform. Why did they choose this messaging platform? Hold up, there's an ADR for that. So as I'm onboarding into the new code base, I can understand where was their mindset when they chose that particular messaging platform? What did they previously consider? Maybe they found out that one thing handles a particular feature better than another. So onboarding into a project, onboarding into a system setup, onboarding into a company, ADRs are great for that. ADRs are great for understanding the why. So why was this decision made? Why was this choice made? And also for showing those alternatives. So what was considered? Well, we looked at ERP platform 1, ERP platform 2, and ERP platform 3. And we found out that one only works in the cloud and can't be hosted on-prem. So that's out for what we need. And then maybe you're looking at 2 and 3 and you realize, well, 2 is a Java application and your servers are not set up to work with that. So that's going to take more time on your system admins to get the servers in a good spot. So maybe that gets eliminated there. So then you have 3. And then it's always, remember with software architecture decisions, there's trade-offs, always trade-offs. So weighing those too. But creating those and capturing your alternatives and their why did you choose this or why did you eliminate this is kind of important. The other thing I've seen is sometimes you'll see that people rush to a decision. So they'll list the alternatives, but they don't say why they were included or were excluded. So it might be, oh, you know what? I went with ERP platform 2 because it's what I know and it's going to be quick onboarding. And I don't need to look at 1 and 3. So they'll list 1 and 3 as, hey, we looked at them or considered them, but they don't say that they went with 2 specifically because that's where the wheelhouse is. You want to capture that because later on down the line, maybe you have an architect who comes in, looks at that decision and says, well, honestly, well, 2 could have solved some of the problems. It still leaves these other problems open, and 3 would have been a better choice. So again, it also allows you to understand the why and to have that conversation with, okay, these are what we knew then. This is what we know now. Does this make sense? And then talking through the trade-offs of, well, yes, this makes sense and we continue forward, or no, this doesn't make sense and here's why not. Okay. Now, when are decision records actually created? You can create them before a decision is made. So while you're trying to figure out, I have a problem, I might not even know what options I have available to solve it. At least capture the context. Why do we have to make a decision? While that decision is being made, document it as you go. Document it while you have that context, because the other thing, even so, I mentioned about the context of future you and tomorrow, 3 months, and a year. But you might be in an environment where you're constantly making decisions and constantly context shifting. And so you might need to write down that documentation stuff right now before that other department comes to you and asks you to make a decision on something totally non-related. So while you're making a decision, sometimes you have to do it pretty quick. At least capture it. When you capture your decision-making thoughts and details, don't panic if it's not in like the template right away. At least capture the points while you still have the context, and then you can go back and refine it and put it in the template as needed. So I'm used to context switching a lot. I have clients in different industries, clients with different needs, different platforms. And so there are times where I'm going to have to do documentation on my clients to go, okay, this one needs this other one needs this other thing. I have to document it right away. Otherwise, I'm going to lose that context. Decision records are also created after a decision is made. Now, I went to a conference at the beginning of January this year, and it was a thinking architecturally workshop. And as soon as he mentioned documentation, that room cleared out pretty quick. There was only a handful of us who stayed. And the reason for that is because we were just like, oh, it's documentation. But one of the questions that came up for those of us who were still around was, can you create an ADR well after the decision is made, just to at least capture what you do know? And the answer is yes, you can. So let's say that you joined the company and the rest of your teammates have been there forever, and they know that this decision was made by a previous architect, and they have glimmers of context where they know a little bit about what was going on. They can put that in the documentation, but when you do something like that, long after the decision has made, make sure you also capture what context you don't have. So make sure you set the expectation of, we understood that they chose this particular platform because it met these needs. We know that they looked at this other platform, but we don't know exactly why they eliminated it, or we don't know exactly what they looked into. You need to capture that part, capture the part that you know you don't know. That way, when somebody else realizes, oh, we need to make a decision, and they pull your decision record, they at least have a general idea of this is why it was started in the first place. So you can start creating these before the decision is made, while that decision is being made, after the decision is made, or better yet, do this all the time with your documentation. Try to have your documentation updated as you go rather than waiting till the very end after the decision is made. Because if you wait till the very end after the decision is made, now you have to replay the whole thing in your process again. Like, okay, what decision was made? Who was involved? Who had sign-offs? What details were there? What context was there? Now let's talk about the life of a decision record. And I'm going to zoom in, so don't panic if you're like, oh no, little writing. Yes, I know little writing. It can only fit so much. So this is a mermaid diagram. How many of you are using mermaid.js for diagramming? Yeah. Or in this case, I used the mermaid live playground. So what's nice about this is you can see, how does your decision record go through? Let's let me laser pen and zoom at the same time. Fair enough. Okay. So you realize you got to make a decision. You figure out who's going to write the ADR. If you have somebody who's strong at documenting, put them on it and collaborate with them. But somebody's got to document this process. Then you're going to create the ADR in your draft state. Now, there's always people who ask, but why do you even start in a draft state? Why can't you go to propose? You typically aren't a one person writing all these things and are going straight to propose. These things may take time to write if you don't have all your details right away. So again, going back to the when you should write this, if this is before a decision is made, you can start it and put it in draft mode. Then you get feedback on your draft, and when you're ready, you could propose it. Now, this particular process, you'll see more in larger corporations, larger environments that have that kind of those checkpoints. In a smaller company, you might not need to have that big of a process. Some places have architectural review boards and even more formal processes. So just be aware that you don't necessarily have to follow this. It could be even more formal or less formal. But the status of the ADR is just so you know, is this currently something that we're okay with? We're testing it out. This looks okay, and we just need approvals. This is something that we've already gone ahead with. This is something we need to go and update. So then you'll have it review the ADR once it's proposed. Once they review it, they can either accept it, move it to accepted, or maybe did it get rejected? If it got rejected, then the ADR status is updated. Otherwise, you improve the ADR and go through the review process again. So that's the decision record and like the status of it. Okay, so where are decision records stored? This is where it gets a little controversial at times. It shouldn't be like that though. I promise you. Who are your decision records for? Are these purely technical decisions? Are they related strictly to the code and they don't impact uh, your business stakeholders? If it's purely technical, then it might make sense for them to live with the code. However, if it's non-technical, do you really want your non-technical users looking at the documents and trying to sort through it while getting distracted by code? No, 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 no. We like our business people. Whether you truly like them or not, you should like them enough to keep them out of your code. So where are decision records actually stored? Well, you may store them in a document store. So some systems that are meant for storing documents, such as SharePoint. Yes, I said the 10-letter S word I usually avoid. SharePoint does have document storage capabilities that could make it possible if that is in your company's choice of platforms. So document storage would make sense. Document control system would make sense as well. So I have a manufacturing background, and that's where we did ISO certification and document control system. So a document would have to go through this very process that we see our decision records going through, where there's a draft status, a proposed status, an approved, or rejected, an obsoleted, or superseded. So there's a formal process there. Document control systems work well with that kind of status update. Maybe you store your documentation in a folder on an intranet. I've seen that with many companies where I've worked or consulted. It makes sense as long as the people who need to access those ADRs can access them in a wiki. Uh, I was at a conference earlier in March, and one of the terms I learned was confluence archaeology, because trying to find things in Confluence can be a challenge. But yeah, in a wiki, your decision records may make sense there if that's where your company stores their knowledge, if that's where companies store their documentation, that business stakeholders could actually see these decision records. I will always go back to the business non-technical, because those are the ones who need to be able to review these and comply with them. Um, and we don't want any more confusion by putting them in repos. Now, again, that said, so you want it in a place where all who are impacted can review the decision records. If they only apply architecturally and technically to the code and no non-technicals, then you can go ahead and put it with your repo. The other thing I've seen with decision records and with document control are things like a decision log. Think of it as like a table of contents listing all the decision records that are available. Okay, so a couple more things here with decision record guidance and ideas. So I went to explore GDD in March of 2024. And I caught Indu Garsami. She did a presentation on how to make better modernization decisions. And if you look up the YouTube video, I'll make sure to include a link in the thank you email. Her presentation had so many tools to help with modernization. But this is what got us thinking about is it really all about architecture decision records? Or could it be something else as well? And she had suggested like the product architecture. So you could see it could be a product decision record or architecture decision record with a topic. And then she talks about the status. So again, be here. Any action items, this would be a way to tell the stakeholders, by the way, you need to do this, this, and this other thing. What I like about her template is that her actual decision is at the top with the supporting arguments and the consequences. But then it's clear where the other options are considered because it's got its own section. In her template, they call out that impacted stakeholders. And related references are nice too, as in like links and other things to help support your case. But that impacted stakeholders, sometimes you'll find that there's that hidden gem in a company who knows exactly it's impacted by all these things. When you find that person, take advantage of that knowledge and document it, because if that person is no longer there for some reason, you've at least caught it in documentation and can go back. So yeah, Indu's template really breaks it up a little bit easier to follow. AWS has a bunch of guidance on this as well. And the reason why I like AWS, so you're going to see with their ADRs, it's like authors and team, a bunch of the standard things that we would see with ADRs and other templates as well. But they point out the potential critical user journey that the decision impacts. When you're making decisions, you think about the business consequences, you think about the technical consequences. Sometimes I've seen it where the user experience is completely overlooked. So you want to make sure that if you have decisions that are going to impact your users, to capture that context as well. Because it's important for people to understand that if your users are impacted by this, how do you roll out your changes in a way that will keep your users happy with your product, as little frustration as possible. So AWS, they had a lot of other things that you see in other ADR templates, but the thing I wanted to point out is that critical user journey. User experience or user journeys are important for things like that. The NIGARD template. So NIGARD's template is probably one of the more common ones you'll see because it's fairly simple. So you're going to see that it's got the title, the status, again, proposed, accepted, rejected, deprecated, superseded, things like that. The context of the decision, the consequences. That's it. There are no more headings down below. There are no more descriptions. They keep it simple. So when people are just starting out and they're like, I feel overwhelmed, what should I start with template wise? I get to choose my template. I usually recommend look at the NIGARDS template first. Get yourself at least started with documentation. Later on, as you look at your documents and go, I need more details or I need to break it up into these other formats, then do so. But you got to start somewhere. And you can't let the paralysis of, oh my goodness, there's all these templates, where do I start? Don't let that paralysis prevent you from moving forward and actually documenting your decisions. The other thing I like to recommend, and people always are like, but why? Is ChatGPT. Because there are going to be times when you're like, I want to document something, but I don't know where to start. It's that paralysis of a blank document. So the prompt that I'm going to show you here in a minute is create an architecture decision record going through specific options for handling domain events in C#. Because DDD, domain things, these are things we talk about here at Nimble Pros, and there are various ways you can handle your domain events. So I put this to ChatGPT. And so let's go ahead and show what happens when I do that. I captured this in video, and this is using ChatGPT 3.5. That way, if you at home want to play with this as well, you see, first of all, what version I'm working with. And second of all, ChatGPT 3.5 is free. And so that way you don't have to put a credit card in and say, oh, now I got to pay for a trial. No, no, no. When I do these webinars, I try to use tools that are free for everybody to be able to follow along with at home. So notice there's the prompt. ChatGPT's got a header, it's got a title, it's got different decisions that we could use, pros and cons. Then it's going to say the consequences for these different choices. And finally, we have the decision outcome and then any references it used. Now, I need to caution you on ChatGPT on many levels. I was talking with some folks about this earlier too. ChatGPT is good in that it will give you an idea of what you're looking at. And it might give you an idea of how your document starts, but don't take it at its word fully and blindly. Don't take it at its word foolishly. Review what it creates. Does it really make sense? I was talking with I mentor some of my folks as well. And I was talking with one and they're like, yeah, I use ChatGPT. I'm like, so do I. I'm like, but with the years of experience, let me show you some things that it does that you got to watch out for. And it was giving NuGet package names that didn't exist. It made it seem like you could just modernize from web forms to C# and Blazor like it was nothing. There's just a package in NuGet that's called, yeah, I know, Peter. There's a web integration and a web migration package that apparently none of us think exists, but ChatGPT assures me it exists. I'm like, no, that's not how that works. The other thing too with these references, so I know looking at it that this link for Jimmy Bogart is going to be fine. This Microsoft Docs link is going to be questionable. And before you're like, but hold up, Sudoku, you should know the Microsoft Docs. Yeah, I live in Microsoft Docs. However, I had ChatGPT earlier this week. It's hilarious. It was like, oh yeah, you go to this link here. And then it's like another slash migrate slash Blazor slash, and I'm like, I don't think any of this works. And sure enough, it was 404. And so then I do what I usually do, which is I would start at the right and go down like, does this folder exist? Nope. Does this folder exist? Nope. Does this folder exist? Nope. I'm like, yeah. So that's, I'm going to caution you multiple things to watch out for. ChatGPT may make up NuGet package names that sound believable, but don't exist. And they may give you citations that look believable, but are also 404 not found. But use it as a guide for like the template and for seeing how the train of thought might play out. Again, this is something to get past the analysis paralysis of it all, the blank page that you're afraid of, but it's AI. Don't trust it blindly. Okay. There are some additional references for working with ADRs. So there's an ADR tools command line tool. I found out about it through the fundamentals of software architecture recently. I haven't played with it, so that's why I don't have a demo for it today. But stay tuned to the Nimble Pros YouTube channel because I have a feeling I'll pull it over and start playing with it and make a video for that. The Fundamentals of Software Architecture by Mark Richards and Neil Ford. Love that book. talks not only about the ADRs, but other architectural things as well, the various architectural styles out there. How do they apply? When do they apply? When don't they apply? Because certain architecture styles work for certain problem spaces. So things to know with that. Documenting the architecture decisions by Nygaard. Remember that simple template I showed you? So he talks about this. This article is from 2011. So that's long ago, but it is very relevant still because it's documentation. And documentation, the standards really haven't changed that much. And then Joel Parker Henderson's GitHub repo. I can't rave about it enough because it has so many templates for ADRs. In addition to Nygaard's, but some of the ones that Indu mentioned in her presentation as well, those more complicated ones. So I will make sure these links are in the thank you email. The thank you email will probably go out tomorrow morning for those who are here for the live webinar. Otherwise, it usually comes right when you sign up for the recording. Any questions on architecture decision records? And it's okay if you don't have questions now, but if you do come up with questions later, please feel free to respond to the thank you email. Those responses come directly to me. So rest assured there's a human on the other side of those thank you emails. That is most definitely me. We do have a couple more webinars scheduled for the rest of this year. I say for the rest of this year, at least through August. And then September through December, I'll announce later on, probably in July. But next month we're doing architecture katas. I will talk about ADRs a little bit toward the end of that, but we're going to go and work through an architecture kata as a group. So we'll talk about what is an architecture kata, and then we'll start talking about the ilities. There will be some blog posts before that to help you kind of get in that train of thought of, oh, what's an architecture kata? Oh, what are ilities that we need to consider? I've got some blog posts that I'm going to put out on the Nimble Pros blog first. That way it kind of prepares you for it. So that's May 29th. That's the end of the month. In June, we're going to talk about the proxy pattern. Proxy pattern gets its own webinar because there are that many different types of proxies out there. We could fill an hour easily. In July, we're going to talk about vertical slices, clean architecture, and modular monoliths. As some friends say jokingly, it looks like it's going to be a cage match. It's not going to be a cage match. It can be friends, I promise you. So we'll talk about vertical slices, clean architecture, and modular monoliths and how they all can be there. And then in August, we're going to talk about .NET Aspire with OpenTelemetry and Grafana. So getting into
I
some,
skipped this one.
you're skipping the .NET Aspire one?
Yeah.
Nah. I'm holding off till August because that's going to be probably closer to when it's more stable. So it's still early. And then, of course, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. Yeah, whether it's DDD, CI/CD, so integrating pipelines and automation, things like that, upgrading to .NET, modernizing your tools. Let us know how we can help you out. Thank you for coming this afternoon to our webinar, and I hope to see you at another one.
Thank you, Sarah. Bye.
Thank you.